Hi, everybody. Welcome to the live cast. We're here today. We're going to have a fun conversation. Betty and I were discussing, you know, we were discussing a lot of things, as COVID continues and we talk about, like, well, what's life like? And there's different people that are extroverts that might be having some challenges and introverts who might be having some challenges, and just the isolation alone could be challenging. And so we we started to talk about it, and we were looking at, well, who are we? Who do we live as though we are? And and when you look at the circumstances that are out there, the political shenanigans that are going on, all the different things that are happening in the world, and you could look at those circumstances and think, well, I'm just this. I'm just Kim. And when you look at it from that standpoint, we started to play with, well, is that really who we are? Is that all there is to us? And each of us knows, at least intuitively, there's something more that's present. So today we wanted to have a talk and a conversation about looking at that something more. So we're going to be referencing Mind is the Athlete. And again, this is for the Institute of Metaphysical Science, sponsored by the Institute of Metaphysical Science, who is scrolling now, the website scrolling now across the screen. And if you'd like to get more information or purchase Mind is the Athlete, it's also available on Amazon. But you can go to scientificmetaphysics.org and you can look at what's available there. We would love the participation and all of that. So with that, let's dive in. We're going to be looking at a couple different things. But when you look at the and last week we talked about Stephen Hawking and how he thought time travel might be possible. Well, in this one, right here on page 23 from Mind is the Athlete, we have a quote, and this was written by Betty Albee, but she's quoting Fritjof Capra. Now, Fritjof Capra is a research physicist in theoretical high-energy physics, and he lectured at the University of California at Berkeley. He's a widely read author, and he's the founding director at the Center for Eco-Literacy. And the founding director, and he's dedicated, that Center for Eco-Literacy is dedicated to many issues of conservation. So in his book, Uncommon Wisdom, and if you've not read it, I highly recommend it. I read it actually years ago, and it's really good. He discussed consciousness and specifically what he called the mystical view. And regarding reviewing his findings, he says this, and I quote, the mystical view regards consciousness as the primary reality, as the essence of the universe, the ground of all being and everything else, all forms of matter, all living beings, as manifestations of that pure consciousness. He continues on with this and goes on and he says, biological structures and manifestations of mind. Now, if we extend this way of thinking to the universe as a whole, it's not too far-fetched to assume that all its structures, from subatomic particles to galaxies, and from bacteria to human beings, are manifestations of the universal dynamics of self-organization, which means the cosmic mind. So that just introduces the conversation that we can look at and that we'll explore today. So Betty, welcome to the conversation.
Yeah, the thing that we have to look at in metaphysics is what is possible if we examine a realm that's not visible. When Capra says that consciousness constitutes, then I look and I think consciousness is not something I can see. I can't hold it in my hand. I can't poke around it, look under it and over it and all that stuff. So consciousness is not easy to explore from where we're sitting as human beings. So scientific metaphysics begins with the ground of being that all is mind. We're mental beings from the outset. What we see, feel, hear, taste, and touch, all the things that we can observe and so on, all of that is an individual's point of view of the reality that's actually present. If, according to Capra, I exist as consciousness, then when I look at Betty in the mirror, I'm aware that he says what's present is consciousness. That isn't what I see. What I see is Betty with her glasses on and talking to somebody and reading books and carrying on here. But that is a point of view, if you will, of what's actually present when Betty shows up. So what's present when Betty shows up is consciousness. So then I become really interested in what constitutes consciousness. What are the characteristics of consciousness? And you know, when you get right down to it, what are the possibilities for me in actively seeing that? Did I say that clearly, Kim?
Yeah, I think that, when we look, when we're engaged in, living our life and things and circumstances are happening to us, or we're experiencing them, I think it's easy to start to get caught up in that the view that you see is the reality that's present. And it is, and it isn't. It's just not the whole picture. It's just one point of view on the one reality present, seeing the only way you can see it. But you can only get to that viewpoint when you realize that there's something more to us than this.
Yeah, and the fun thing that I discovered in Capra's book, he talks about some of this. He said, when you really begin to explore this area that's not seen, not heard, not felt, physically speaking, he said you can equate it to, suppose you landed on Mars and nothing was familiar and nobody understood what you were saying. And you know, there you are. You've got to somehow have some continuity in your living, and yet you want to explore where you are. If I actually exist as consciousness, I really want to know what that means.
Right.
What are the things that I may be capable of that I haven't even given a thought to?
Right.
You know, like I never considered, for instance, that I could play a musical instrument or be a ski pro or you name it. I have this limited view of what I can do and who I can be. And so it helps to think, well, let's see, if I were on Mars, I might have to learn how to grow some vegetables or figure out how to eat dinner or something like that. So it would be a whole new thing to explore. So when I explore consciousness, I want to know what capacities would that present me with that I don't already explore?
Right.
And so one of the things that really stopped me was when I began to explore the possibility that consciousness wasn't limited to me.
You mean like to this?
Yeah, it wasn't limited to the Betty picture.
Okay.
Consciousness is universally present, whole and complete. And I thought, I never thought of Betty as being universally present, whole and complete. What does that do? So then I can't say, well, I couldn't play an instrument, or I couldn't be a skiing pro, or I couldn't this, or I couldn't that. Actually, if living or the presence of life is universally present, whole and complete, that opens a whole new ball game. And then I think about what else? So we've got a whole arena to explore one way or another. And what I find is that once in a while during the day, when Betty's running around doing her thing, she stops to think, you know, well, I may be tired. Well, then I think, wait a minute, Betty might be tired, but who I am is certainly not tired. The world is still carrying on. And that energy, which I call the energy of spirit, but that energy constitutes who I am. It constitutes consciousness, or consciousness is the energy of spirit, either way you want to say it. But when I start looking at these bigger pictures, I can step way outside of things I think Betty can do. I don't even have to consult Betty. There are a lot of things that would be possible. Wow. Like that.
Right.
So try the Mars experiment and see if that helps you. Well, I'm going to stand on Mars for a while now and see what else I need to know.
Well, one of the things, and I think that's one access for sure, is to just have that kind of game with yourself. But one of the things that I remember from growing up, and that was, when you can basically play with an idea of something. So remember your fur coat?
Yep.
And tell that story.
Well, my husband and I were just buying our first home or second home, I forget which, but anyway, it was a financial challenge. And we had two little kids. And my husband came home and said, well, what's new today? And I said, what I really need is a new coat. And he said, what kind of a coat would you like? And I said, being funny, well, heavens, if I had my choice, I'd get a fur coat. I said, but I know that's not possible. He says, why is it not possible? And I said, because we have a house we're paying for and two little kids, and I don't see where the money's going to come from. He said, well, don't limit yourself. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, well, there's a book out, and I forget, do you remember the name of that book, Kim?
Psychocybernetics.
Psychocybernetics. And he had been playing with that and talking about it with people at work. And he said, according to this book, if you do all the right things, you can have anything you want, anything, without being a problem. And I said, yeah, great. And he said, don't laugh at it or scoff at it until you've tried it. So I said, I didn't say anything really right then, but the next day I got up and I said, okay, I'll take it on. Well, what do I have to do? So he gave me this list of what the requirements were. Things like, well, you decide what it is you want. You cut out pictures, you put them up on the refrigerator, you put one on the mirror in the bathroom, whatever it takes to remind you that this is what we're focusing on now. We're going to get this. And so anyway, that was one of them. Then the other one was you had to actually actively go and explore what it would take to get it. And then you have to keep that up over a period of time. So I said, okay, I want a fur coat. So I began to find pictures and I put them up. I did all the things it said. I went to the store and I tried on fur coats, and they were, it was impossible, huge prices and all that stuff. But I did it. And then the second time I went and looked, I actually found a fur jacket that I liked really well. And it looked nice on me. And I thought, wow, that would be something if I could get that, And so I shared my story with the salesperson. And I said, I've kind of got this game going with my husband. And he thinks I should try on what looks nice on me and what would fit, and keep it visualized and stuff, and she just kind of got in the spirit of it. She said, well, the other thing you need to do then is watch for the sales. You never know. So for weeks I did that. Nothing ever happened, but I visited my coat down at the store once in a while, and I talked about it a lot. I told my friends I was zeroing in on just the right coat, and every once in a while they would ask me, well, how's your coat coming along? I said, still down at the store. But this went on for several weeks. And then one day I picked up the paper, and the store was having a huge sale all over the store. And so I thought I better go down and look. So I went down to the store, and I went in that department, and the gal that I knew wasn't there, of course. But anyway, I went in and I leafed through everything and looked and looked. And then I found this jacket that I had really liked. And lo and behold, it was on sale. It was still quite a bit of money, I thought, but it was on sale. So I called up my husband and I said, well, how much money were you planning to spend on a cloth coat for me? And he said, well, I don't know. How much do you need? And I said, well, what do you think about $300? And he said, well, is that the best you can do? And I said, well, yeah. And he says, well, he said, I probably can do 200, but I can't see doing more than 2 or 250, but 200 I could be comfortable with. And I said, okay. So I went back and I thought, 200. So then I talked to the sales girl and I said, I really like this jacket, but I said, I can't really imagine coming up with quite that much money. What do you think? And he said, anyway, I thought about it a lot. And I said, well, I don't know what I can do about the other 100. I said, I can come up with 200, but not 300. She said, well, we have this 90-day arrangement. If you buy the coat and we put the other $100 on a 90-day payment thing, it would come up with a payment of about $35 a month for 3 months, and you'd have it, including the tax. And I said, $35 a month? I can probably get that out of the grocery budget. Anyway, that's what happened. I did that. I came home with a fur coat. In 3 months, I had paid all of that other $100 off, including the tax, and I had the coat. And then Ed said to me, well, what do you think about the psycho-cybernetics now? I said, it worked, but I don't understand how it could work. But it did. Here I am with a coat. And he said, oh my. He said, well, are you going to use it again? I said, well, I don't know. I'll think about it. But I said, I'm not sure about psycho-cybernetics. I'm a doubting Thomas, you see. And he says, you have to learn, Betty, to do what works. But I did end up with a coat.
And the thing is that it's just a new view. It took willingness. It took just willingness, but then you were also free with it. And so I would suggest that you had a focus of what that was, but you weren't attached to it.
Right.
And so it then, you know what I mean? So it's like it was a play, but then relate that to who we are and the shifting view, our ability to look at reality, our perceived reality, maybe differently.
Yeah, and I can see where the same principles apply a lot in human living, because you have to be free and open. You have to be really willing. And you see, we're not interested. For instance, it wouldn't be of any interest to me at all to sit around and think, well, what am I going to wish for today? And instead of having something useful come up, have maybe a new dish for the dog or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, well, actually, we run our lives by meeting needs. It's like, this is what I have to pay attention to today, so I
Mm-hmm.
will, and it gets handled. Now, what makes that happen?
Right.
And what makes it happen is the willingness to step outside of the Betty who wants it, the Betty who thinks it has to be that way, and be willing to have it be any way it needs to be, so long as it meets that need, just any way at all. That's not easy sometimes, but that's necessary. You have to be unattached to the way it's going to look. I had a Sunday school teacher one time that said, I asked her, what does that mean? And she said, it means that if you want to have transportation to high school and you think it should be a great Cadillac, you might get a bicycle.
Right. It reminds me of the joke about the big flood. There's a big flood, and this guy who's very who's very religious, and he's standing on the top of his roof, and he's praying to God, God, please, save me. I promise, making all these promises and whatever. And so a motorboat comes along and they say, come on, get in. We're here to rescue you. And he says, no, me and God, we have an agreement. And then a little bit later, a helicopter comes by with a bucket to pick him up off his roof as the floodwaters are encroaching. And he says, no, me and God, we have an agreement. And he does this again one more time. And then pretty soon the flood takes over and he drowns. And he winds up at the pearly gates. And he says, God, I thought you and we had an agreement. And he said, well, I sent you a boat and a helicopter and and you said no to all of them. So here you are. And so anyways, I think that's an interest also. I mean, it's a joke, but it's like, you don't, if it has to look a certain way, you'll miss all the other potential ways it could look that are showing up for you to have that outcome that you're really for.
Yeah.
So it's about letting that view go.
Your attachment to how it should be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so if we can allow things to be and we carry right on, then the things are going to show up exactly as they need to show up so that you can continue to move forward.
Yeah.
So, anyways, so what else do we have here to discuss today?
Well, I like this sentence. It says, treating the physical world, which I refer to as language, the seen, heard, and felt stuff, treating that as if it were causative is actually erroneous.
Right.
The physical world is a point of view. In your case, it's your individual way of seeing. It's what you suppose and assume is present.
Right.
It is not generative. What you're seeing is your point of view on reality. What's actually present that has anything occur is consciousness.
Right.
You may have it look like a chair to sit in, or a grocery store to shop in, or a car to drive, but that's a point of view of your own ever-presence, your own omnipotence, your own allness.
Mm-hmm.
And your point of view is not it. It's just pointing in the direction of reality is present and all is well.
Right. Right.
That's
yeah. So if anyone has any questions, please type them into the comments. We'd welcome any questions. So go ahead and type them in and we can address those. We will read them all and we can bring them up. And you can do that at any of our live streams. Again, we're talking about consciousness. We're talking about who we are beyond what we look like, what we view in the mirror. and our own reaction in relationship to the circumstances that show up in our world, and how to maybe look at those with fresh eyes from who we are rather than the look of us. That maybe there's something more to who we are than just the look that's present. So what's one access point? What's an access point in? So now what we've got is at the beginning, you said play with this whole thing like you're on Mars. And then the whole thing that you did about getting your fur coat. But and then it's being unattached. But what are some takeaways that people can look at and really play with this week?
Well, you really want to begin to look at, how do I put that? Your own understanding of what's going on. We don't tend to tackle anything that we don't understand. So we need to take a look at what we assume we understand. And then the willingness to say, maybe it isn't exactly the way it looks. What else is present that I'm not seeing? And then the other thing that strikes me as very important anyway, is when you are willing to play the game with yourself and say, okay, so what I'm seeing is my point of view. What's present is whole and perfect right now. Free, whole, perfect, joyous, so on. That's what's going on. Reality is always perfect. So perfection present, and I'm looking at it and seeing it look like this, whatever. What would I have to do, or how would I have to be to allow the reality to run the show? I have to be willing to have it look any way it wants to look, meeting the need. Give up my judgments, give up my opinions, my considerations, my analyzing, my evaluating, all of that. Just let it be. Say, yeah, and just put it over on the shelf and say, nope, I'm going to just sit and watch and see what shows up. And when it shows up, meeting the need, even in a tiny degree, I'm going to say, great, on we go. And see it continue to meet the need. The less Betty interferes with what's showing up, the better it is.
Right. And one of the challenges is you do that and you practice that and you have this amazing result. And then you want to turn it into a recipe, like you can follow certain steps and always get that same result. And as soon as you turn it into a recipe, you build up a lot of expectations and you have a lot of pictures for how it ought to look. And when it doesn't fit those pictures, you wonder, well, it doesn't work anymore. So you want to be really careful of turning stuff into a recipe.
Yeah, there's one thing that I can tell you, though. You can't forget that your human view is always your human view. It's never what's actually present. It's a point of view, and it points you in a direction, but it isn't 1, 2, 3 to what's actually present.
Right. And the power that's available
Yeah.
when you're tuned into it.
Yeah.
Very good. All right. Let me look at the comments and see. So there's a question here from Sarah Busey. She says, are we separate from things going on or what we see? Talk about chalkiness.
I don't know what chalkiness is.
Chalkness, chalk in all directions, chalk.
Let me think about that, Sally, and I'll get back to you.
All right.
It's been a long time since I've heard that expression.
Yeah, it's chalk in all directions. If everything was chalk. Anyways, well,
it's kind of like having the seen, heard, and felt everywhere.
Yes.
and it always will be. That view will be that view, will be that view.
Right.
And on we go with the fact that what's actually present is perfect.
Right.
Now,
Right. And she comes back in and says, solid spirit.
thank you.
Yeah. All right. So we're at the bottom of our hour. We're at the bottom of the half hour. And so I want to thank you very much. Is there anything that you want to leave people with before we end for today?
Nope.
We're going to leave you with nothing.
I feel like I've been talking quite a bit.
And everything. Nothing and everything. And so anyways, there we go. And so we'll see you again 1 week from today. We'll have a new topic, a new subject. And we welcome your comments and your participation. Again, we broadcast on Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Central Time, both on YouTube, on our Rethink Life channel, and on our Facebook page. So
5 o'clock Pacific time.
7 o'clock Central, 5 o'clock Pacific. So that is correct. So if you have any other questions, or if you would like to explore what else we're up to at the Metaphysical Institute of Metaphysical Science, then you can go out to scientificmetaphysics.org and check it out. And you can sign up. We have lots of different resources out there and ways that you can participate. All right. We'll talk to you soon. And until then, we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.